short, almost an epilogue to the reading from Isiah. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus told his disciples, "I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." Here ends the reading. Last year, maybe about this time, maybe a little earlier in the summer, I attended a workshop down at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, offered by a sort of itinerant teacher by the name of John Philip Newell, who's has connections to the Celtic tradition in the church through the island of Iona in Scotland. He's Scottish. And the focus of the workshop had to do with connecting with the spirituality that embraced and took into account the natural world around us. And at one point during the workshop, he invited us all to go outside, out of the human building and out into the outside world, and find some element of nature and just attend to it, to see what it might have to say to us. So out we went, but we were, on this sort of suburban college campus in Hartford, so it was mostly just lawn. There were some trees about. And so some people went off to sit under a tree, some people stretched out in the grass. I followed someone who went sort of around the corner of the building, and then I cut across to the back fence. And there I surprised a rabbit. Well, I was very pleased with my good fortune at having found an actual, moving piece of nature. And the rabbit took a few quick jumps and then froze right by the fence, where I could see there was a little hole that it could pop through if it needed to. And it, as rabbits do, it froze and became completely still. And it looked at me with its one eye. You know how they do that? They look at you sideways. And so I was very still, and it was very still. And we looked at one another, and I'm like, okay, I will try to just hear what this rabbit will say to me. And after a moment, I realized that it spoke to me very clearly. Not like literally, because, this isn't Alice in Wonderland. You didn't pull out his pocket watch. But there it was frozen, and I heard as clearly as if it had been words. The rabbit was saying, "I am afraid of you." And I didn't know what I could say back to it. How can I say to the rabbit, "Fear not"? Because I know how I must look in the rabbit's eyes. Rabbits, after all, are prey to humans and to so many other animals, including our own dogs. Everything about that rabbit's posture in that moment said, "I am ready to run." The fact that it was sideways to me, so that it wouldn't even have to turn around if I should take a step towards it, and that single eye. We used to have homing pigeons in the backyard, and birds always, they do that too. The pigeons, they have that single eye. That's because they have like an eye on each side of their head, right? Because they are always needing to keep an eye out for threats. Predators, on the other hand, like my cat. I don't have a cat now, but I have they have two eyes in the front of their face. They have binocular vision. Because they're not worried about something sneaking up on them. They want to sneak up on something. There is a reason why owls and cats look so much alike. They are both after the same prey. What then are we with our binocular vision? There are other clues that will tell you whether an animal is a predator or a prey animal. Do they have claws for digging or for catching? Do they have teeth for gnawing or for biting? Biology and evolution sort of dictate whether an animal is predator or prey. That's what makes this verse from Isaiah so preposterous. The lion eating straw like an ox. It doesn't even have the right teeth for that. How can it possibly eat straw? No. You're either a wolf or a lamb, or a lion or an ox, or a serpent or a dove. But which then are we? With our sharp focused eyes and our bizarrely delicate paws. In fact, Isaiah is not writing so much here about lions and wolves and sheep and oxen, but about us. The verse about the sheep and the wolf that Isaiah quotes actually occurs earlier in the book of Isaiah, and then it's quoted again here. It's referenced again in this passage that Jolene read, and it's quoted here in the context of talking about human violence. Because Isaiah is talking about violence in Jerusalem and longing for an end to violence in Jerusalem, a longing which is poignant to this day. Jesus, too, was speaking metaphorically when he said, I sent him out as sheep among wolves, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We all understand the metaphor, because after all, when we refer to someone as a predator, we don't mean that they're not vegetarian. Pretty much ever since Darwin, we have been prone to this idea that nature's lesson is eat or be eaten, and that applies to human society as well. And that survival of the fittest means survival of the fiercest and most fearsome. But Jesus and Isaiah before him teach a different ecology. A way of being that is neither prey nor predator, neither afraid nor frightening. Be wise as serpents, Jesus says, but innocent as doves. The wisdom that he talks about here is sometimes translated as shrewdness or guile. The wisdom that he's speaking of here is worldly wisdom, the kind of wisdom that is usually won at the expense of our innocence. How are we to be both, then? Wise as a serpent, yet innocent as a dove. How are we to be wise and cunning as a predator, and yet gentle as its prey? I'm reminded here that when the early church was searching for metaphors for Jesus, sometimes they called him a lion. So what of us? How shall we enter that peaceable kingdom? How shall we overcome our fear of our own fellow human beings? And how shall we overcome their fear of us? We may feel that we don't look very frightening, but every zebra knows that even a lion is peaceful when its belly is full. How can we say, fear not, to those who have historically had reason to fear? The quote on the front of the bulletin from the book of Job, I first came across not reading the Bible, but reading the autobiography of a nature writer named Sally Carrier. I was aware of her vaguely as sort of writing stories, nature stories about animals, but this particular book was given to me by a wise friend of my mom's. I said, you should read this. And it was, in fact, mostly just her own life story, which included some very frightening memories from her childhood. She was raised by a dangerously abusive mother. And the trauma of her early childhood continued to, as it does, create a lingering vigilance in her. It's hard to be a dove when you live with serpents. But in time, her writing and her interests led her to pursue a life in nature. And she lived by herself in a cabin in the woods. And there she wrote about her wildlife neighbors. And the interesting thing was when she arrived there, she realized she had nothing to fear from them. But they were afraid of her, and not without reason. And so day by day, she would sit and cultivate the peace and the stillness necessary to build trust. And it was not a quick process. But in time, she came to be surrounded by this family of animals that would freely approach her as she sat by her doorstep. And she found there a sense of safety and belonging and peace because she found the animals so much less frightening than the humans in her life had been. Ask the animals and they will teach you. How do we do this with one another? How can we learn to convey with every posture of our body and every word of our mouth and every action and intention the simple words, fear not? Perhaps we start by practicing with the rabbit in the yard. Ask the animals, and perhaps they will teach us. Or the birds of the air, because perhaps they will tell us. We'll speak to the earth, and it will teach us, even the fish in the sea, and show us the way.